So according to the U.S. Department of Labor, the first Monday in September is our yearly national tribute to the contributions that workers have made, contributing to the strength, prosperity, and well-being of our nation. But it's probably not often enough that we stop to reflect on the holiday that we call Labor Day. I think many times we're grateful for those of you that get a 3-day weekend, or maybe even in some contexts, Friday is given off and you get a 4-day weekend. Or maybe you are going to be working, but you get time and a half, and that's pretty cool if you're working tomorrow. But probably we don't stop often enough to think about our labor itself and how that reflects on how God has made us, what He has given us to do, as well as what He wants us to, at times, stop doing, and that is to rest. One of the things that we oftentimes can overlook is this idea of rest, resting often and resting adequately. And so it's worth noting there's been some work done at the Boston Consulting Group by 2 professors from Harvard Business School, and they were able to demonstrate that when everyone needs to be constantly available at all times, that productivity is a challenge. But that when individuals are able to take time off from their work and be absolutely, just have downtime, that their work itself actually benefited. And, so God made us in this way. He made us to need rest, and He made us to need rhythms that He has established. And work in itself is good. I want to establish that from the beginning. Work itself is good. It gives us the opportunity to partner with the God who works. And He's always at work. And He can do way bigger things by way of His work than we can do. But He calls us to partner with Him in His work, in what He is doing in this creation, in what He's doing on this earth, and through the people He's created. And then rest lets each of us enter into closer fellowship with God through the enjoyment of rest and time in His creation, reflecting on that beauty, reflecting on the relationship. We sometimes call that rest R&R, rest and relaxation. Sometimes we find it nice to be able to unwind during our time off by taking part in recreation. Recreation is simply 2 words, recreation, to make or create new once again. You feel refreshed and renewed by way of, maybe someone like me, I like to get out and play soccer. I don't want to do that every time I rest, but I find it invigorating. I like doing that. But God has made us to make sure that we're doing this. Ideally, all of us would find the right balance between work and rest, alternating in a healthy way, because doing that has a great promise for us as human beings, that we can, if we have the right perspective and the right balance on this, that we can have physical health, our mental health, our spiritual health, all in working in proper order, but sadly that's rarely the case. Back in the olden days of 2014, an economist noted that 60% of people, this was kind of when smartphones were coming in, 60% of people who use smartphones are connected to their offices for 13 and a half or more hours a day. So, once your computer travels with you and your phone and your email and everything, it gets difficult to disconnect. When we lack rest, we find that we begin to suffer physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Physical and mental exhaustion will oftentimes lead to us not acting like ourselves. We act more volatile. We become more easily irritable and anxious, and this can all just sort of bubble up into larger issues, and pretty soon we don't know what's going on, and are seeking outside help, and and our relationships can become strained, and our spiritual lives can become strained. And the most refreshing relationship that we should have should be our connection to God. And that's where we're going to find the greatest meaning and the deepest joy in this life. And that becomes diminished as well. So lack of rest, we know, studies prove this, can lead to poor health and poor work quality also. It can lead to anxiety, depression, insomnia, weight gain, heart disease, and even a weakened immune system, which makes us more vulnerable to catching various sicknesses. So this morning we're going to be looking at 4 things. The first of them is, I'll put them up here. The first is why we need to rest. We as Americans are horrible at this. Number 2 is why we can't rest. Why do we find it so difficult to rest? Third, we're going to look at how our rest can be restored. And fourth, how we can rest in faith. But let's start back up to the beginning. God, in the beginning, we find him at work. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. He is working. He's always working, and work itself is good. And he plants Adam and Eve in the garden, and he tasks them with work. And so work is good. Work is awesome. Work is healthy. It's something that engages our mind and body and creativity, and work is good. And then, lo and behold, there comes a problem a few chapters later. But let's start with the beginning of why we need to rest. In the book of Genesis, God does this work of creating, and he pronounces everything very good. But then, on the 7th day, God rests. And it's something that when we get to Genesis, let's see, I'm going to flip back there. I don't know if I have this passage up here. But when it comes to telling us how God rested, Genesis 2 and 3, by the 7th day God completed his work, which he had done, and he, who doesn't have to rest, ever, rested on the 7th day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it. He called it holy, because in it he rested from all of his work which God had created and made. So the first reference we get to something being declared holy is rest, here in Genesis 2. And it's going to go on to emphasize 3 times that God rested. Why did God do this? Well, to help us, to give us a pattern, to lead by example. The next mention we have of this rest, and God declared that it would be a day of rest, so the 7th day of every week, comes up in the it comes up in Exodus 16, and then it comes up in Exodus 20. I think I've got that passage up here. This is part of the 10 Commandments. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now, there's a lot packed in here, but we see that God is establishing work. He creates it as a good thing, but then he also establishes rest. So there's a lot going on here, but one thing that, and I might even want to write a journal article on this at a certain point, but to me this speaks loudly. That here in Exodus 20, I think this is a powerful passage that speaks to God creating in 6 literal days. So I'm a literal 6-day creationist. And one of the reasons, probably the strongest reason that I take this view is because of this passage. Because it says that God in 6 days did all this work, and then he rested. And he made us in his image, and we work, and we get tired, and we need to rest. And when I get drained and I need to rest, I reflect back on the God who didn't get tired, but he rested. Why? Because he did this work of 6 days of creation. So it's just an easy to understand concept that God has given us. Rest, we also read about it in the book of Exodus, chapter 16. And this is a very powerful passage because so this is kind of backing up 4 chapters. The people of Israel had been enslaved in Egypt. You remember reading about that? Pharaoh, new Pharaoh comes on the scene. He oppresses them. They're making bricks without straw, and their lives just get worse and worse and worse. And they begin crying out to the Lord. They're desperate. They're being worked to the bone. Well, look at this passage, Exodus 16. God says to his people, 6 days, he's talking about his manna that he's providing for them. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, there will be none. Now it happened that some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none, just as God said. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and obey my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. He's given you some rest. Therefore he gives you on the 6th day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. So the people have just come out of Egypt. And Egypt was not a theocracy. It was not a place where all of God's instructions were being carried out. They were at the mercy of the Egyptians. They were a Gentile people, weren't following God's laws. So while in Egypt, while enslaved, I don't think that they were observing the Sabbath probably at all. I don't think they could. I think their schedules were set by the Egyptians. So maybe they were working 10 straight days. I don't know. Before they maybe got a day off, but they were totally at the mercy of the Egyptians, and they, I think, had gotten accustomed to life as slaves. And so here we find them on the 7th day, they go back to work. And God's like, no. I need you to establish a new pattern. I need you to have a regular day of rest, and I've chosen it to be on the 7th day. It's been said that really without the Jewish people, who to this day take this concept very seriously, and they really rest on the 7th day of the week. And stores shut down and things. It has continued after all these thousands of years. That is basically why we have a 7-day week. We owe God and his design and his people carrying it out for all these centuries to thank for the fact that we're not just working on and on, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days at a time and just getting totally worn down. Now, that's even become, taken a step further in our day. We've seen for a lot of the 20th century a 5-day work week, and then I think that the pendulum has switched back the other way, and people are working many times more than ever without a set day of rest. But this is a reflection of God's design. So I think that the best that we can do is try to establish this pattern of taking 1 day out of 7, the same day each week to rest. So maybe, a nurse or a professional football player or something, they know they're going to be working on Sunday. They're going to need to take their day off on a different day. Maybe it's Monday or something like that, and it's true of pastors as well. But that there needs to be 1 day that you can count on, and that's a powerful thing to not just keep working and working and working and working without rest. So God, he institutes the calendar basically for his people, and in the process, not only does he give them a week and a schedule to abide by, but he also gives them certain days and certain holidays on their calendar that are yearly times of rest and refreshing. These festivals God gives them include the Feast of Passover, which is a whole week-long feast. They came to Jerusalem, and they got together with friends, and they rested from their work, and they celebrated. Also, there were other feasts. There was Pentecost, and there was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. There's also one in the fall, Rosh Hashanah. You might have heard of that. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. It's the top of the year. It starts a new year. And that's one that doesn't get a lot of attention, but basically God commanded his people at Rosh Hashanah to come and to gather in Jerusalem, to blow the trumpet, and then to connect with him and to offer a sacrifice as part of their time of rest and refreshing. I think we kind of understand this concept because on New Year's Day, many of us try to take a day that day to rest, to start out the year with some rest. So Moses in Leviticus gives them these commands in Leviticus chapter 23. But I want to get into a few things of maybe why we don't adequately rest. God gave his people these not only weekly but yearly, every 7 years, every 49 years, year of Jubilee, times when they were to stop even planting and harvesting and just rely on the Lord and trust him for an entire year. But it's funny because as human beings, I think we inherently know our limitations. We even the most powerful, you think of the most powerful, capable people in this world. People that have vast fortunes, that have vast kingdoms and administrations and large corporations and, making billions of dollars and all of these kinds of things. Powerful, capable people. And at the end of the day, they still have to sleep. And many of us wish that we didn't have to sleep. You just want to take on that project and just see it all the way through, but we get tired. And God made us to recognize our own limitation, that we are not God, even though so many people continue on as if that was the case. But our batteries get depleted, and God just wants us to lay down and sleep, get rested up. But that creates an inherent problem for us because when we sleep, we can't control things. So, the market, forces could go south. Some, act of war happens overnight. There's, something that, from a military standpoint, right? There's always a desire, there has been since the ancient, times of wanting to post night watchmen to watch for an enemy attack. We just looked at Gideon. When did he attack? In the night, the time that they were trying to sleep. And so by resting, there's an inherent mechanism that God designed that built into us where we have to trust him. We have to trust him with the things that we can't control. And so that leads right into the second one of why we find it so difficult to rest, and it comes from the fall. Because the fall makes work difficult. Work is good. It's inherently something that God gives us that we are to thrive on. So much so that if you look at the beginning of the story, God sets Adam and Eve in a garden. If you go all the way to the other end of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, you find the city, the New Jerusalem. So there's been thousands of years of human history of people engaging in projects, building roads and buildings and organizations and structures and, basically pouring their labors into contributing to building contributing their work and their efforts and their talents and their creativity to building things which make society better, make life hopefully better, and not doing things that are destructive and tearing down. It's always a way to see if something is a noble cause or one to be steered away from. Is it desiring to make something better, or is it desiring to tear something down that someone has built? But going back to why this is a problem is because work now, after the fall, becomes laborious. It becomes difficult. There's weeds and there's difficulty, and it's not easy anymore. It's not just, we now can talk about work being backbreaking. It's labor intensive. It's difficult. We're on our feet all day. Maybe it's mentally draining. It's just so many problems we're trying to figure out, and there's just forces, headwinds, these forces that we're working up against all the time, and it can make work seem bad, but work is inherently good. It's just after the fall, it's a lot harder, and it's a struggle, and it's something that we can lose perspective on. And so God, because of this, he establishes that there needs to be this work-life balance. But it's difficult for us because when God offers us rest, we think, well, that's me being lazy. I'm not working hard enough. I'm afraid that others are going to get ahead of me if I'm not working that day or all those hours or working through the night or whatever. Maybe I'll lose my job. My coworkers are going to think of me as someone who's slacking off, or maybe I won't get that promotion, or it's all on me and the company's going to fold if I don't just be going. And so we can become anxious and we can find ourselves in unhealthy patterns, becoming workaholics and such. But today, God has given us the same instructions that he gave to his people repeatedly in the Torah. Work, rest, in balance. So the third one, how can our rest be restored? How can we break out of a harmful cycle, one that is self-centered, so that we can find the rest we need? Well, some people think, it's going to be a matter of willpower, that I'm just going to be so rigid about observing maybe a certain day of the week, maybe for some it's Saturday or for some it's Sunday, that I'm just going to, through sheer willpower, make sure that I'm just not working and I'm going to force rest. Well, that's probably not going to work really well. I mean, it might clear some calendar space, but it also might not lead to the type of rest that we need. So getting the kind of rest that God desires for us is not a matter of scheduling, but a matter of trusting. We have this passage in Matthew chapter 11. Here's another one, Ecclesiastes 4. Talking about workaholism. Then I returned and I saw, Solomon says, vanity under the sun. There is one alone without companion. So somebody's just on his own working, doesn't necessarily have a family he's trying to support. And it says, yet there is no end to all his labors. He's just going and going and going, and he's never satisfied with his riches. And he says, who am I doing this for? I'm depriving myself. And he says, this is vanity. He says, this is not a good thing. But let's look at this passage, Matthew 11, 28 through 30. Jesus says, come to me. And this is of it not being a matter of scheduling, but a matter of trusting. Who are we trusting in to find our rest? All you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus is not a taskmaster. And I think one of the biggest lies of Satan is getting us to have a wrong view of God, getting us to think of Jesus as someone who's going to be looking over our shoulders, trying to just, make us forcibly put burdens on us that are just extra difficult. And, burdens, really, biblically, we find them not coming from God. Burdens come from man. So Jesus, what he did when he came to this earth is he made offers like this. He also modeled what rest looks like. He would get away. He would take time alone to spend with his Father, get out into nature. He observed the Sabbath, but he did it a little differently, didn't he? He wasn't a scheduler, a rigid, I got to make sure that I'm not doing this and this and this and this and this on the Sabbath. That was the perspective of the religious leaders, and they were making the Sabbath into a burden. And Jesus said that we need to make this unburdensome. And at times, he would get into a lot of trouble because on the Sabbath, he was trying to give people more rest. He was trying to free them from an infirmity or something that was a hardship. And even that grew disdain from the religious leaders. And so on the Sabbath, as Jesus observed it, it was a time of rest and worship, and Jesus did both. So again, it's not resting properly is not a matter of scheduling, but of trusting God, and that's the key. It's all about trusting God. If I can't trust God, I'm going to think that I need to work harder and work more hours and work myself to exhaustion and get myself into a really bad spot. But if I can trust God, that his promise will be good for me, then I can rest, and I can prioritize rest, and I can do it from a place of trust and not of rigidity. Let's look at our next one, which is how can we rest? And the key is in faith. Since we can give our burdens to Jesus and experience deeper rest, that's key. It takes a surrender of our own control. That's really what it comes down to. There are things that we focus on, to-do lists, problems. I'd say the biggest thing that weighs us down, of all the things that cause us anxiety, of all the things we worry about, it is the future. It is the unknown. It's the things that are out of our control. And yet God knows the future. And so we worry about things that are in his domain, that are in his control. We have a remedy in Ephesians 4 of what we should focus on instead of the what-ifs. The what-ifs are an absolute prison because we can't know the what-ifs. We can think up things, and they can really weigh on us, but at the end of the day, they're still hypotheticals. So instead, we are told to think on this, Paul writes to the Philippian church. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. And it's a lot easier said than done, isn't it? But God wants us to focus on him and on his promises. And what he has promised us by way of his word is really wonderful. He constantly promises us rest if we will trust him. And that's why the wilderness generation, the Kadesh Barnea generation got themselves into so much trouble. They couldn't trust God and enter into the rest that he'd promised them. He promised them they would go into the promised land. They saw it for what it was. It was the land flowing with milk and honey. It was the land that God said, I'm going to give you houses you don't even have to construct. I'm going to give you fertile farmland. Everything is going to be good to go. You just have to go in. And they didn't trust. And as a consequence, they didn't get to experience God's rest. That's no different than us today, struggling with the same thing. Human beings will always struggle with finding it acceptable to get adequate rest and to trust God with rest. God has designed things like days off and things like vacations and things like holidays for our benefit, for our blessing. But it really is an inner battle. And Jesus tells us of the nature of this in an area that we don't often think about. And it comes from Matthew chapter 16. And it has to do with discipleship. Following Jesus as a disciple is inherently difficult. And why? Because we have to overcome ourselves in that inner struggle. If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. He's flipping things on its head constantly. For what profit is a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his own soul? So discipleship is costly. It's costly to follow Jesus. It's difficult to follow Jesus. And at the heart of it all is our inner battle, that struggle within. Can I let go enough to follow Jesus? I'm always grasping for control, but Jesus says, follow me. There's something in each of our hearts that we inherently gravitate toward things that promise to give us rest, but that will leave us with anything but. God invites us into his rest amidst the work that he has called us to, the callings that he has given us in our vocational lives. He promises rest and he gives rest. He is faithful. It's one of his great promises to give us rest, and we can take advantage of that and take him at his word, and he's true, and he does it, and it's right there available to us. But then on the flip side of that is an idol. And idols aren't just little things that sit on shelves. They can be that too. But they're anything that we elevate above God and that take priority in our life and that start to consume us. And one thing that can be said for sure about any idol, no matter what it is, no matter what we're finding ourselves spending all of our time and treasure and effort serving, is that it will fail to bring us rest. And in fact, the opposite, it will make our lives even more frantic and unrestful. What's the solution to it all? Acknowledging and repenting. That's, when we see where our lives have gotten out of whack and we see that we have failed to adequately take God and trust him and find the balance that he wants for us between work and rest, we just need to acknowledge that things have gotten out of control, that things have become a problem, and that we're coming and taking him at his word and taking him his promise of rest seriously and desiring to allow him to give us the rest we need. We're all electric cars are all the rage, and they have batteries. You drive and that battery is just going to, and then you got to stop and you got to recharge the batteries. And that's how we are too, is we have to have our batteries recharged. And God has given us the right mechanisms that we can do that with if we will just trust him with those times of rest, weekly, daily, weekly, seasonally, annually, and it doesn't just come automatically. We have to prioritize it. And if we will do so, we will be the ones that are blessed by that and experience the rest that God has for us. We'll close there this morning. And if we'll close in prayer, and then we'll have our final song, and then we'll have snacks out there. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time, for the powerful promise that you've given us in your word of rest. And you've reiterated it to us in Hebrews as well. And people wonder, what's that all about, that rest in Hebrews? And Lord, probably most likely it's multidimensional. You've given us the promise of your rest, and it has lots of implications and applications and settings. But Lord, may we prioritize that because of who you are, your character, and that we are trusting you. Help us to trust you. Lord, help us to desire the good things you have for us, and for then that to be also part of our testimony, that we don't have to work and work and work and work without sleep and work ourselves crazy and experience all the physical and mental and spiritual and emotional side effects. But Lord, others see us implementing that unorthodox but healthy pattern that you have given us for our lives, and the promise that you have laid before us can be theirs as well. They can come and experience a yoke that is not burdensome. Thank you, Lord, for this message. We ask that you'd bless each one on this Labor Day weekend. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.